Hi, welcome back to the Always Right podcast. I'm author Carissa DeLay, and this is my co-host.
Jamie Vendera, I'm just messing with you.
I was like, "Are you frozen?" Like
I do that to a lot of my students.
you did a great job of just standing still. I was like, "Okay, this is gonna be great. We're gonna have
That's
to
tough for
stop."
me. That's tough for me.
Yes,
We have a great topic today.
yes, and this is kind of your thing more than my thing because I
Yeah,
wrote sort of.
no, yeah, I was going to say it
Well, I
is and it
guess mine
isn't.
can be classified as
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay,
really do. I think it's a broad spectrum when we're talking about
science
sci-fi.
fiction,
Yes,
yes,
science
sci-fi,
fiction.
science fiction in writing, absolutely. So, okay. So to get started, of course, I made some notes. And let's just get started. Like, what is science fiction?
Well, science fiction to me is it's of course it's made up, but it has a lot to do with science and technology.
Hmm.
Fantasy would be like wizards and stuff like that. So when I think about sci-fi, I think about futuristic elements, maybe combining actual science that we know, but taking it to another level with fiction. Like, you think of Star Wars and there's the lightsabers, so
Hmm.
it's a laser. We know lasers exist, but they took it to another form. Time travel, speed of light travel, anything that's futuristic,
We
or
think.
even modern day and
Hmm.
futuristic or modern day, and
Oh wow! Look at that little
it's
attitude and accent coming out of there. It didn't sound very southern.
finally. But it's make believe, but with a lot of hints of truth to me. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
I definitely think it's like a speculative genre, like where you can kind of press the thought process of science, because obviously you're using the key science fiction. It's science and it's not real. So for me, I feel when I think science fiction, I always think alter Earth. I always think, some kind of alien. Um, I think of things where it's like invasions and kind of tapping on using science to press our possibilities that we may not know now, but like, well, I mean, possibly we could use this theory and push it this direction and make a whole book series out of it. So,
Absolutely. I've read, I mean, I've a lot of even my fantasy has elements of science fiction, but I haven't written a lot of science fiction. Phoenix Earth, the
I was like, I'm
duology of,
noticing Phoenix Earth behind you.
that's why I put it up there.
Oh, look at you getting all organized for the show and the episode.
In 2 minutes prior, I
You
did
didn't have to
it.
tell people that. You could have been like saying, I was well planned in advance. I was
I was
actually on
I
top of the
was
game this
well
time.
planned. The weeks in advance. I set that
Mm.
up there and I did my studies. I didn't wait till 5 minutes before and you're sending me notes. I never
Well,
do that.
which I was very impressed that I was like, I got into the notes. I was like, oh, Jamie has added here. Nice, nice.
Well, I know that's a shock for you, and I appreciate the praise, the pat on the back, because I'm
Yeah.
never in there. Because you're like, "Are you want to get in here?" I'm like, "After I'm done today," but I was like, "Yes, I need to be a better partner," and things were
You
coming to me.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's not just about being a better partner. You need to be the best version of yourself that you want to be, and you want to be writing. You want to be doing this podcast.
I do. Just the fact of this podcast, I have to admit this, and I hate to say this because I got too many things to finish, but Phoenix Mars, I want to write it now. I want to write at least a third book in the Phoenix Earth series to tie it in.
You
That'll
are
be in the
not allowed
future.
to do that
I
until you
know.
finish Age of the Sigil.
And I'm not going to say the name I came up with in a dream last night because I will
Yes.
dream a lot of this stuff, but I
Yep.
came up with this cool name. You're like, I really like that. And I'm like, I cannot even touch it. I have to
Mm-mm.
finish Sigil and some other series before I can touch these, but it's like fire under my butt. It's like, I got to get to this new book. Can't
Hmm.
yet.
Yes. Yep.
So,
So just
me
write it
happy.
down. Write it down. Put your little and just whatever.
Oh, I
Just throw
did.
things on there. Yeah. Throw things on there every once in
Yeah.
a while. I'm turning something
Yep,
off
and I
on
wrote that
LinkedIn.
name down because I would not remember that. It was just so weird, and I dreamed about it. So you can't know till the book comes out, people.
That's right.
So,
Which might be in
all
like
right,
40 years from now.
yes, I need to
That's
take
great.
some age reversal stuff to make it to that age.
Oh, there you go. Read a science fiction book on how to
Science
age
fiction.
reversal. Yes.
Yes, there we go. I want to be
All
Benjamin
right.
Button. All
So,
right.
okay, something else with science fiction that I feel is typically kind of like a an all-encompassing is that when you are writing science fiction, you you I feel like you have to be able to be descriptive because you're creating worlds that don't maybe exist. You have to be a writer who has the capability of putting your reader who's not in your science fiction brain on that planet, make them feel like they're in this new space. But if you're on a different planet, you can't keep talking about earthly things.
Correct.
You know what I
And
mean?
that's like, even like I created a planet called Malachar, and humans had Martians had died out. They moved to Earth. They destroyed that planet. They found another planet called Malachar, and as humans they interbred, and then they created Maluans. And then I was talking about like the scenery, what the flora was like, what the food was like. So when I'm writing science fiction, it has to be very descriptive. I have to implant, if I'm coming up with a new fruit, which I did in that book, and it was like a delicacy, I would mention that several, not all the time, but there was, here and there. So you made that connection, like, oh, there's that fruit that they love on that planet.
Hmm.
Made new technologies. Like I come up with these machines called sifters when they came back to Earth, and they could put these things in the ground, and it would vibrate the silica and the sand in the ground, and it would build a glass wall. They can make their own buildings out of glass that was almost unbreakable. But you have to be very detailed in the
Hmm.
way a person looks, how they sound. And this is like we've talked before. I always keep notes because if you have an editor read and they say, "Oh, you're not being consistent. What about this? What about this? What
Hmm.
about this?" If you create a new world, new characters, new facial features, you have to be consistent. You
Yeah.
cannot mess it up.
And I think I remember, and I didn't, and this just popped in my brain, but I think I do remember like even Avatar. So it was like 20 years in the making for not actual making part, but because it took 20 years for the concept to reach technology to be able to create what Avatar looked like, the first movie, as far as that goes.
Yep,
Because how the author of that envisioned it wasn't something you wanted to see with not CGI.
correct.
Yeah. So, but like, I can imagine just like when, and this, technicality wise, Harry Potter isn't considered sci-fi, but she created a whole language of spells and stuff. So when you're doing science fiction and you're creating, your Malakarians or you're creating all these different things, you do need to keep a very organized note because someone may catch you on it and be like, oh, at one point they were blue, at one point they we didn't know they even had hints of this. So you want to almost like have a storyboard, an imagery, something that you can refer to back and forth when you're writing, like, oh yes, this is what this character looks like. Maybe even use this is where I think maybe not as far as like plagiarism, but where you could use AI to create an image to inspire you to remember what your characters look like. Or if you have an artistic hand, you can draw pictures of
Yeah,
what
that's a
your
great idea.
what your planet looks like. Kind of put pictures up around your writing space or in your writing notes that you refer back to that you're like, oh yes, that's right, I used these colors together, or I created a flower that produces blah 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 that you only blooms like every 14 years. So remind yourself it's only every 14 years. Remember when you're saying 14 years, where did you start your timeline in your book and where are you at in the timeline now? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
no, I
people
think
add things up.
that's an amazing idea. I'm in this Terry Brooks group for the Shenra books, and there's a
Mhm.
guy in there who's been making AI of the characters and the elf stones and stuff. And are they really representative of the actual character and the fantasy stuff in there? Not really, but kind of in the ballpark. And
Mhm.
people have been on him. I'm like, leave him alone. He's having fun.
Mhm.
But you could use AI, and I know it's going to advance and be better as we go on. But don't like freak out or be upset. Like, oh, it's not exactly what I imagined. This is just a placer for you to remember. And then if you could, even if you wanted to have artwork done, you
Mhm.
could take that AI to a true artist and say, "Look, this is kind of what I'm envisioning, but this was what's wrong with it."
And if you
And
live
then
near a college that has a an arts program,
art,
yeah, an art department, you can reach out to one of the professors and say, "Hey, I have a project maybe that one of your students might be interested in. If you have a student that is really good with this kind of thing, maybe they would be interested in doing storyboards for you to help you do that kind of layout to remember and focus on stuff." I mean,
absolutely.
like I get very lucky with Tim when I tell because Tim knows my stories. Um, for Canvas. He knows what's happening to where he can kind of get into my head about this book. Same thing with the first one. He really didn't know the ending or any of that stuff in the book, but he kind of knew a general idea what I wanted it to look like. I'm like, I told him, I said, I wanted this, and I wanted this, and I wanted this. And he had no idea how the book ended. He literally did not know anything. And he literally created a picture of the ending of the book and didn't have a clue as to where I was going with it. So he was ultimately my original AI.
Yep, and you did a good job too.
All right. So question. And I know that so I went into the notes and I put out a few questions, basic guidelines of how we were going to run the podcast as far as to cover topics. And something, of course, I put in there like what was the original science fiction?
I knew this is what was
You
next.
got it wrong.
And I said, as soon as I think of Mary Shelley, who wrote
Mhm.
Frankenstein, and honestly,
1818.
yeah, she's considered people consider her the first actual novelist of sci-fi, and you would not think that because, regardless of what you're getting ready to say, to prove me wrong, you would think it was just a monster because everyone thinks Frankenstein's monster. It's a horror book, but no, because she
No,
was tying in science,
yes.
reanimating dead tissue.
Yes, and we would call that bioengineering now.
Yep.
So she was ahead of her time and she was creating a science fiction that people didn't think you could technically do back then. So in a sense, in her timeline, because now her timeline would be considered monsters and more like in that horror genre. But back then she was peddling the science field of reanimating tissue, like you said, and connecting things and making it into something, a whole different, creature. So it was science fiction in a sense. But like
then
H.G. Wells is also considered, in that it's kind of a debatable topic.
And you had a good point.
What?
It's like she's a woman, and I hate that. That like, but even I still see that today, and it irritates me. But back then, it probably was hard for her to make her way, and not be considered the first. Where I know, Isaac's considered or H.G. Wells considered more the father.
Well, yeah, so
Of
that's even debatable. So, like, that's a thing that's, again, debatable. People will say, oh, H.G. Wells was the father of science fiction. But I was reading that also Jules Verne, like 1979. That's like almost too late. Sorry, Jules. No, that's really late into the world.
And but I love them both too because they're sci-fi, but they're really different subgenres of sci-fi. From monsters, or aliens coming to our planet to diving into the sea, finding a new world. So
yeah, and like Agatha Christie, and like there's a whole bunch of people there that you could think of that kind of took on that world. But I did some digging. Okay. Hold on here. I go back to my notes here. So I remember because a true story. It's called A True Story, written in the 2nd AD by a Greek person who was kind of like satire. Literally, it says in the beginning, none of this is true. Okay, but this is a story of someone who goes on and like this is a set. Now, this is the thing that was crazy because if I was reading this, I would have thought this was like 1400s, 1500s, maybe even like actually I'd probably put it more like the 1700s because of the fact that it was about adventures even going to the moon and meeting the people of the moon, and the people of the moon were fighting with the people of the sun, and the sun created the people, the army on the sun created some kind of like technology thing that allowed the moon to be encompassed by a cloud and block the sun's light, and then they won, and then they end up getting along and causing a treaty. But like it literally talked about these alternate, like this war in space. Okay, this is 2nd century.
that's crazy. What an
Yeah.
imagination.
Yeah, and it was like a Greek person, like someone in like the 2nd century that basically he was the type of person, he wasn't into religion, and so he kind of played on the whole like outside this world and like all these like rulers and all these different things. It was kind of like satire against government essentially, but he used science fiction. They were able to travel to other planets. There was a interstellar war going on, so technically that would have been the first sci-fi.
Yep,
And it was
1600
considered
years earlier.
it would be considered a novella today because it wasn't quite as big enough to be a novel, but then at the same time, it was not short enough to be a short story.
Learn something new every day. I had
Hmm.
no clue. I was like,
Hmm.
Mary Shelley. And you're like, sit
No, I
down,
saw you
Jamie.
put that on there, Mary Shelley, 1818. I'm like, you're wrong. No, I mean, and it's like I said, like anything else, it's a debated topic. But I feel like someone in the second century that is already writing something about, you know, interstellar stuff, traffic. I mean, and then I got to thinking about the Bible. I mean, some people find that as a piece of fiction, but even if you find it as truth, there's a lot of like interdimensional things happening. You know, there's a lot of things with
Revelation, talk about the angels and the way they look. That
well, and
seems
and
sci-fi.
some of the things that people will pull out and say, it's almost like there's technology in there when they're talking about certain types of wheels and whatever. So I mean, there's religious texts can technically be what we consider science fiction when it comes to some of the things that they talk about. But anyways, but yes, okay. So with that said, let's move on. So is Phoenix Earth your only science fiction?
I mean, there's elements of sci-fi and kill factor with
Oh yeah,
Hadrian.
because yeah.
Like he's like they use serums to make them stronger. That he was like in a Black Ops program where they did things to his body that like now you have performance enhancing drugs, but with this it was like you're injected and you are taken to 10 times the level of what you are with your sight, your speed, your strength, and it remains. It isn't like it wears off. It's
Right.
so there is that. Because when we wrote that, it was more like James Bond meets Jason Bourne meets a touch of the X-Men. And that also ties in with the like Order of Five. Even though it's YA, that is YA sci-fi. What am I
Hmm.
thinking? I have written a lot of sci-fi because
Yeah.
that's modern days. But these kids were injected, and one's super fast, one's super strong. One has electrokinesis. So I do play a lot of that, but I guess I don't really think of it as sci-fi. I think of it more as YA adventure, but it is sci-fi adventure. So there's sci-fi elements in almost everything I do, even the fantasy with some of the stuff I come up with.
Right. So let me ask you this then. So do you feel like science fiction has to be somewhat accurate, or do you feel like you can skirt on things that wouldn't make sense?
I think it's a blend for me. I will say I'm much more accurate in something like Kill Factor or Order 5 just because the time setting is now. So like if Hadrian Black is over in Europe and he's in this certain town like Helsinki and he's somewhere, I'm like I make sure like I research Google Maps,
Hmm.
Google Earth. So like if he's going into a building, I have researched it just so that element of location is correct, and even the technology I don't change it, but I will add the fiction parts to some kind of new technology.
Mm,
So like if it's a gun, it's a gun. It isn't a gun that shoots lasers or something, unless it's Phoenix Earth, of course.
right.
So,
Well, I
but
mean, so you could
go ahead.
change. I mean, technically, you could change things. Like I feel like, so for example, the movie Gravity. Did you ever watch that?
No.
So that movie was. I mean, me just in general, I'm not a complete, scientist by any means, but there were certain things that happened in that movie that I was like, okay, that wouldn't happen in zero gravity. That would like there were things that were happening that you're like, okay, this doesn't even make sense. But at the same time, it's a work of fiction.
Yep.
Um, it's kind of like when people get upset about certain character changes to fictional. It's a fictional character, you know.
I agree. And you know what? And there are those purists, and I've seen that. Like, that would never happen. You could not get that close to the sun, or if you were in space, you would be dead in this time. It doesn't happen like that.
But I
How do
mean,
you?
at the same time, it's all based on theories. So those are, I feel like, you can skirt on.
Plus, if that's the case, you could say, "Look, I'm in an alternate universe. I'm in an alternate dimension. I'm not on this Earth. I'm on another similar Earth, but it's just a different
Mhm.
dimension."
Yeah, but
So,
I mean, yeah, and then like so it's kind of like whenever you are creating whenever you're creating, oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for?
pretzels.
Yeah, I actually have a really good recipe for pretzels.
Okay, that's why I mentioned it.
Yes. No, so like when you're creating oh, it literally just slipped my mind, but it'll come back to me. Like let me read because I have my
Whenever you're
notes.
creating a world, a new technology, a character.
Delete this awkwardness when
No,
I
I like
edit.
it. I like it. I like these flubs. So, but you do what you want to do. You know what? There's no holds barred when it comes to sci-fi. You're going to have the purists that are going to get mad if you're not accurate, but it's your world. I mean, you could put any live person in it. It could be.
But I feel like you have to
Um,
make it make sense. Okay, so when I say accurate, maybe I should say more make it make it make sense to an extent.
yeah,
Is that yeah? So whenever you are maybe changing, because I mean, you got to think about it. We have flat earthers and we have round earthers, and then even from that, like you can make either of those theories sound true.
yep,
So it's kind of like both follow certain laws. So at the same time, when you're creating a fiction world, make sure that when you say it's this, make sure later on it's consistently going to flow with whatever happens in the end. Like if you're telling me that at certain points of the day, gravity changes, and then you're at the end of the book and that's that time of day, but the gravity didn't change, is that because something's happening, or is it because you forgot to actually put that in the storyline?
precisely. That's what I was saying earlier. You have to be accurate. You got to keep track of this stuff.
Yes, I feel
Like
like that's what I was talking about with accuracy. Like and at the same time, accuracy with keeping if you're going to make it sci-fi realism versus sci-fi, we're literally on a different planet and all these things. Like I mean, it's like no different from going from Earth to Krypton.
correct.
So, the laws of gravity are different when you're in a red sun versus a yellow sun. Make that known if this is how things work or whatever. Oh, something that I did when we were talking about the true story, the first fiction, it's Lucian of Samosata. So it was a Greek guy, and yeah, he seemed to be like kind of one of those people he was kind of controversial back there, and he just kind of liked to pull people pull people's strings. And
Good.
even like when he wrote that book, I guess at the end it said he would explain more of these adventures in the next book. But the thing at the very beginning, it said everything in this book is a lie. He never wrote another book.
So I wonder if that was on purpose.
I think it was on purpose because I'm going to go with that one. I'm going to go with he was just a genius.
That's
Because
smart.
yeah, so I don't know. That's just
So
everything I'm writing is a lie.
everything we're telling you in this podcast is a lie. No, it's truth.
It's true.
Or
Yeah.
is it?
I don't know. You can believe me, not Jamie. All right. So let's talk about some of our favorite sci-fi storylines. And you can go first.
So for me, I don't read a lot of books, and we'll pick up where I was. I'm not into like reading a lot of science fiction, but I binge watch stuff like Battlestar Galactica.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of my favorites. I've probably watched that 2 or 3 times. The OA. There's all these Netflix shows I'll watch again and again.
I watched the OA.
Yeah, it was kind of weird.
But it was kind of cool at the same time. But
It was.
you classify that as science fiction?
I think so. With traveling the way she's jumping into other dimensions, and they had to learn all those movements.
Yeah, but she's the original angel. That was not necessarily science fiction.
Well, I will tell you, but I've seen some stuff that's kind of science fiction, kind of like
I didn't
through
watch
books.
the second season.
I didn't either. So I might have to watch it again and be like, well, that's not really sci-fi. But what would you say it was then?
I mean, that would be like almost in the realm of fantasy, essentially, because it's dealing with like angels and.
I think it just got me as sci-fi because of the way they were jumping. They were jumping into other dimensions and doing this. But if you want a sci-fi one, Eureka is definitely sci-fi. I mean, that's a lot of technology. I love that show, and I've watched it several times. And that's how I get inspired. Even with Phoenix Earth, I was watching Battlestar Galactica. There were some other ones like Stargate Atlantis. There was another Stargate they did. I can't believe I forgot the name. It was only 1 or 2 seasons, and they were on that ship.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Stargate onto the ship, which is my favorite Stargate. I can't believe it just slipped my mind. That's fantasy. Love that. And that inspired me when I was writing Phoenix Earth.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So like I don't typically watch series that have science fiction per se, but I do like to watch science fiction movies. Like although I did watch Star Trek. I love Star Trek.
Yep.
I watched all
Same
the
here.
Star Wars movies, of course. But I can't think of a series other than like, of course, watching Star Trek on TV when I was younger. But other than that, I don't binge watch very much sci-fi stuff. I like to read pseudoscience sci fiction stuff when it comes to like potential things as far as in that world, but not as storylines. So for me, it's one of those things, but I write about it apparently.
Yeah, same. I would read more sci-fi if I had more time, but for
Mhm.
leisure, if it's that, it's fantasy. I love Cinda Williams Chima. I love Terry Brooks, of course. So I'll dive into them. But I'm behind on that. There's 3 books from Terry I haven't read, and I will not read until Age of the Sigil's done. It's like
I'm
that's
glad
my
you said that.
carrot. Yes, I'm like I cannot even take time away until I'm finishing one of my books. Then I'll jump in and have fun and read something.
Yeah. So like that's like with Crystal Gate. Crystal Gate technically would be considered sci-fi because this is dealing with the vibration of crystals, and she's a quantum physicist. Um, but at the same time, it there's a little bit of alien aspect to it, as far as, but it overblends with that religious sci-fi in the sense that there's the angels and the demons and the devil, um, and all that stuff to it. But not that's a very whenever I guess I was trying to explain my book to people, that was a very fine line I walked with because I didn't want people to think, oh my gosh, it's a religious book and we're preaching because it wasn't preaching. So I didn't want people to think that. So it's very hard to find that
Balance.
yeah, that balance where it's like, okay, so it's like sci-fi realism that is on Earth, but they're dealing the main characters dealing with creating a atmospheric deference for the military. But and along the way, then the devil falls into this journey along her path. So I mean, that's the thing is finding where that genre fit because it's a mystery, it's suspenseful. There's a little bit of sci-fi, but at one point like an alien ship like vibrates from underneath they're on a boat and the water starts vibrating and they could feel the ship vibrating and an apex ship comes up in the shape of a triangle out of the water and just hovers. So
Yeah, I think there's no bound. I think if you got a sci-fi idea, follow your guts or write down notes that you have about it. But then you could do what we do, like watch something that's similar. If it's going to be a space opera, you could watch Battlestar, you watch Star Trek, Star Wars, not to
mhm,
plagiarize, but to kind of, make you think outside the box and be like, okay, I kind of see where they're going. And this is a norm, time travel or speed of light travel. So there's certain elements in the subgenres of sci-fi that have stuck, like traveling at the speed of light.
mhm,
So I see a lot of people using that, and that's fine. But, think, what can I do differently? How can I
yeah.
tell a different story arc to make this really stick?
And you can always read about I mean, if you're writing sci-fi, I feel like you should have a little general knowledge of the science that you're trying to change. And it's, like if you're trying to alter gravity, you should probably have an understanding of current gravity to know what you're changing.
Yep.
Um, but something I just remembered this in Crystal Gate that I did, there was a body left in my book where, and I did this because there was a body that was left, and it was almost like it was melting, like not the body, but like it was the ice melting or whatever. So the body looked like it had been frozen, essentially, and left out, outside or whatever. So the reason I did this was because if you were going into a portal and your body didn't vibrate properly frequency wise, you may freeze to death, if you go in the wrong way. So the key was the devil was coming into this space because this is where, well, his minions, where they were watching Alexis. This was right below her house, and they were coming in and out of this portal. Well, this human went into the portal accidentally, and they froze to death. Okay. So to translate that into how the cops would see that, how would this happen? They actually, you can cry when you cryogenically freeze someone, it doesn't freeze you the same way as hypothermia.
Correct.
And it doesn't create the little icicles in your blood cells that stab you to death from the inside out. So basically I had to introduce that science of cryogenics into that, because that's the only thing they go, if somebody is cryogenically freezing meats, this is what it would look like in the inside. So when the person did the autopsy, they're like, well, this is what it would look like. This person's body looked like they were cryogenically, like, basically dry froze.
So you did a little studying on this
Mm-hmm.
to bring that realism into the sci-fi.
Right. So that way cops wouldn't be like, essentially they're like, oh, this must have been what happened, because I mean, why would the first thing they think of be angels and demons coming through portals?
Exactly. I know when you said melting, though, you reminded me of this movie from like '78, The Incredible Melting Man, a sci-fi movie. I
Mm-hmm.
can't really remember. Like, I think he went to the moon or space, and he's coming back down. Something happening with radiation, and he turns into a monster, and he's melting, but he's killing people. Now I got to go watch it again.
Oh, speaking of movies, my husband said Kingpin, great movie.
Exactly. See, we're on the same wavelength.
Yes, 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 yes. So, all right, let me double check our notes, because sci-fi, in a sense, is basically, like we said, it's this imaginative world of futuristic concepts that would make us kind of provoke our thoughts to push the possibilities of current science fields, and which is interesting because when we were talking about the one guy that was second century, you have to think back then there were a lot of necromancing. Like there were, priests and things who were trying to use
Lead into gold,
yes, they were
immortality.
manipulating sciences to create, like, magic, and they were using the magic of religion. Well, I should say they were using religious tools to access magic, which prior to 16th century was a part of their religion, was to use magic to manipulate demons. So it was essentially the science. This was the occult that originally started after, like, the heretics and the witchcraft stuff, that they eventually evolved into what we have of science now. Science came from the occult. That was once the 16th century church took out magic. They basically took it out, and the cult said, "We'll take it. We'll take
Yep.
it." Yeah, and that turned into science. So, I mean, I guess if you think of it that way, anything that does any kind of alternation to the natural realm is considered science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, even back as like King Solomon, they're thinking about the signs and the symbols to, create reality.
I don't know if you can hear this or not, but they're doing bomb testing.
No, can't hear it.
Mm.
It must be tiny bombs.
Always interesting on the base.
Yes, tiny bombs.
Well, our house is like literally a half-mile walk to the bay, and you can just hear the sounds, or even, like, I don't know if they're breaking the sound barrier or what they're doing, but there's a lot of booming going on near our house. So, okay. Oh, did you add this on here? Like, okay, yeah, like, so basically science fiction can create philosophical questions and
Yeah, I mean, like to make you think about life. That's like, not that it was down that route, but that's why I interjected in Phoenix Earth. You had humans, you had Malakarans, and you had Maluans when they interbred, and there was a lot of racism on that planet, like we have today here between races. And so the Malakarans, there was like, we're purebred, and Maluans, they're an abomination. You should never mix with humans. That's disgusting. And that's why a lot of them left that planet when they found out that, Earth is starting to rebuild and come back and flourish, where it was almost destruct,
flourish.
Yeah, I can't even talk. I must need some more water.
That's funny.
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. Yeah. So now, if you're a science fiction writer, again, like we've spoken in previous podcasts, make sure that when you decide to publish your work, that you are aware of who your audience is, first of all, who you're trying to send it to, who you want to publish it. Make sure that's someone who's interested in science fiction. Know where you want it to be before, like, where are you pushing your work? Where are you gonna go to? Like, don't have someone proofread it that doesn't like science fiction. Don't have someone that's more into romance and they like review. I've
I'm
got
aware I'm rubbing off
you're
on you.
rubbing off on me. Yes. Do not have someone who does not read science fiction review your book. Review your book. Yes, there you go.
You know, I never thought about that's so true. Find an editor that can also edit that style. And I
Yes,
never
because
thought
if they're an editor that doesn't know that genre, they're not going to know whether or not the Malakarians what's a Malakarian.
I think I lucked out with Rich because
But he writes stuff like
he dives into what what I where he's like, that is so cool. So he must dig sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah.
So
Also, when you're writing science fiction, make sure that I said this in the beginning, but make sure you're explaining, like in your prologue, maybe a visual aspect before you get started. You know, we talked about prologues before as well. So that's a good point to be like, kind of like Star Wars does. Make sure that you're kind of getting your reader into like, okay, how far in the future are we? Or how far behind in the future are we? Give them a timeline. Also make sure that they understand that maybe you're on a planet that like one rotation isn't 24 hours. Maybe they understand like a whole day takes like 13 technical days on Earth in comparison.
yeah, I mean, if any of you own like my Shifters books or the Feral, it all ties in. I have one world, even though it's fantasy or horror, it all ties into the same world, and I do that a lot. I'll start with the prologue, so you know, like it's the year 2077, and in 2025 this happened, and the end of the world happened, and then crossbreeding genetics and where cats were born and ferals and blah 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 blah. So that the scene is set before you the first chapter, so you're not lost.
Right.
So definitely, I think you should. I'm not saying everyone has to follow our pattern, what we're saying, but I like to know where I'm at before it starts. I've seen shows like that. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And then, 20 minutes in, I get it. I understand. But I do like to know a little bit about it before I start reading.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how The Host was by Stephenie Meyer. It's kind of a science fiction book, too. And it takes about 60-some pages to get into it because she's kind of diving into what's going on. And you're getting this whole, like, background, which can be kind of boring. But once you're in it, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so in it. But it takes a little bit of time to figure out what's happening. But be very clear what you're explaining.
I loved that movie.
I read the book.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't read the book, but the movie, I thought, this is cool. I was like, man, I wish she'd go deeper into this.
Yeah. Well, the book does go deeper into it. That's the thing.
Yep.
Yeah, the book is very thick. She's a thick book. So yeah, that's basically science fiction for you. We love science fiction as far as like the creativity and stuff that authors can put out because it's pretty unlimited. But we definitely want you to get your stories out there. Everybody's got a story, so yeah.
Indeed. So have fun.
Right.
Love it. There's no wrong in writing. I mean, there is. You have to have it fixed by an editor.
Grammatically.
Yeah. Grammatically, there's a lot of wrong in my writing. Every text. But you know
what? That's what we should do next time we record is we need to talk more about Grammarly.
I actually thought about getting it and I thought I'm just going to shoot this over to Chris.
Episode on it and we can talk about it and I can explain, share the seat. We'll need to test out sharing the screen. Because what I'll do is I will take something that maybe I've written and just very vague, like write it kind of like uninspiring per se. And then I'll show how Grammarly can make it more descriptive. They can help you with correcting your grammar, stuff like that.
I did not know that. I thought it was just for grammar corrections. So it's kind of like AI.
No, I pay for the premium. So like if I have a sentence, I'm like, man, this sentence isn't sitting right. It will take your words. It doesn't create words for you. It's not going to like AI, like, oh, you should put this word in there. It's going to take what you have and it's going to look at what you've put in there and it's going to say, okay, these are some more words that you can use to be better descriptive. Or you can say, well, that's a little too long. Can we shorten that a little bit? So it'd be really cool to show how that works.
Yeah, I love that
It doesn't
idea.
work. It doesn't work for everything the same, because sometimes you have to break out smaller pieces. Because if you put it into like as a big piece, like it'll try to make it like a professional paper, and it will take out your fiction ability. So it's not technically. You just got to kind of like line by
Cool.
line or stuff like that. So yeah, we will do that. That's on the list.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. Thank you for listening. And as always, you can follow us on all our social media at alwaysrightpodcast.com. There's a page there. You can click on all the little icons. It'll take you to YouTube. It'll take you to Spotify. It'll take you to Twitter, take you to our Facebook. And you can also email us on there, which is at alwaysrightpodcast@gmail.com. So you can ask us questions or you have comments that pertain to the podcast. So I'd be more than happy to reach back out, or we'll add it to the set list. Or we can even add your questions to the listeners and they can comment in the future as well. So, without further ado, we want to say we love that you're listening to us. We love that you're following us, and we truly appreciate you. And always, I am author Carissa DeLay, and this is my co host,
Jamie Vendera.
Thank you for listening, and always right.